Hi, Misha here, and last time we looked at two Dassault planes, the Rafale C and the Rafale B. And actually now I've got the pilots in there correctly. I had to modify the Hobby Master pilots a wee bit, cutting off their feet and kind of shaving down their butts. One thing I've noticed, the French cockpits, and this isn't something that Panzerkampf did here, they're just small. And in this video, we're going to look at the predecessor, the Mirage 2000. And we have another Panzerkampf here, like I teased at the end of the last video. This is a Mirage 2000B, the two-seater, the conversion trainer, although it is armed. And we have the updated version, the Mirage 2005F from Hobby Master. And again, like I said, it's not a Panzerkampf info problem. Even the Hobby Master cockpit, the little pilot, is very small in there. It's just how they are. And their planes tend to be relatively light, small, simple in a good way, almost Soviet, but with a little more elegance. And these are all, of course, delta wing designs. And sometimes the Rafale is kind of mistaken for just an improved Mirage 2000, but it's really not. It's a totally different aircraft. Note that there's no canards on this, and this is a single engine design, and just doesn't. It's solidly a fourth generation, whereas the Rafale is a 4.5, let's say. And of course, since this is a French aircraft, you know it has an interesting development history with breakups and flirtations and all the other good stuff. So let's get into it. And the story begins here, at least part of it. This is Dassault's earlier Mirage 3, which led to the Mirage 5. And this is from Falcon models. And again, we have a heavily modified Hobby Master pilot to fit in the cockpit here. I had to trim his feet off and shave his butt down quite a bit. Very tight seating. But luckily the Hobby Master pilots are kind of this rubbery material, so they flex. The good news is once you pop them in there, they tend to stay because they kind of pop into their positions. Anyway, the Mirage 3 was quite an impressive jet, and we'll talk about it more in a future video. But it was capable of Mach 2.2. It was just under 50 feet long, had a wingspan of about 28 feet, carried a total of, well, it had 5 hard points. It could carry up to 4,000 kilograms. Typically, it was fitted with 2 short-range air-to-air missiles. Early on, AIM-9 Sidewinders. Later, in the 70s and 80s, they could be the Magic 1 missile. And then it had a medium-range air-to-air on the center line, typically French. And then it had fuel tanks that actually doubled as rocket pod launchers. It was a striker. It wasn't a strike aircraft. It was an interceptor, maybe interdictor fighter. Had 2 30mm cannons. It had a ceiling of about 56,000 feet. Single engine, pretty simple, dependable design. And the Israelis proved it was quite successful in combat. The Swiss also flew it. A lot of nations flew the Mirage 3 and its variants. But of course it was aging. So in the 1960s, France was looking for a liver replacement. Sorry about that. Now, originally they partnered with the UK for a swing wing design. This was right after the UK decided they were backing out of the F-111B, F-111K as the UK variant. And so originally they were going to partner. Now they had already started to partner over what would become the Supercat Jaguar. But things fell apart. Now Britain would go ahead, finding partners with Germany and a few others, and eventually this would result in the Panavia Tornado. But France, as usual, started to go it alone. This became the Dassault G, and eventually G8. And then they had the G8A, which was a fixed-wing variant. They had success with the Mirage F1C with a fixed wing. So, yeah, they kind of looked into that. But they looked at the specs for the G8A, and then the F-16 came out in the 70s, and foreign nations started buying it, including Israel. And so they thought, well, we need to upgrade it. This became the Super G8A. Quite a capable design, at least on paper, also quite expensive. Now, Dassault, looking not just for the French military, but also export, had several projects on the board, including a secondary one known as the Delta 1000, meant to be kind of a small, lightweight, affordable fighter interceptor with a secondary strike ground attack ability. Very secondary. This evolved between 1973 and 74 into the Delta 2000. And then, right before Christmas, in 1975, the French all had a big meeting, a big powwow. There, they canceled the Super G8A. And at the same time, they promoted the Delta 2000 into being the Mirage 2000. And the French Air Force expressed extreme interest. This was to replace the Mirage 3 and some Mirage F1s and even some older aircraft that were still kicking about. So the kind of second line aircraft ended up being important. And this was a single seater known as a Hunter or Fighter. Now, interestingly, they had another version known as the Delta 4000. If the Delta 2000, Mirage 2000, was kind of like the F-16, the Delta 4000 was kind of like their F-15. But it never really got anywhere, much like the Super G8. It was a little expensive, big, and heavy, and no one wanted it. Anyway, fast forwarding to 1976, the Air Force laid out specifications for what they wanted in a new frontline aircraft. Incidentally, these specs just happened to, I'm sure it was an accident, meet the specs on paper for the Delta 2000, Mirage 2000, meaning it was a shoe-in. And they said they were interested in purchasing 200 from Dassault. So they got to work building a prototype. So let's take the 2000B off the stand here. Again, this is from Panzerkampf PK, and I do like it. The tail is metal as the body, and it does have more weight than the Rafale from them. So anywho, Dassault got to work, and much like with the Rafale, this was built in France. In fact, it was pretty much built in Bordeaux, a few different locations, but final assembly done there, except for the earliest prototypes. Speaking of those, they were quick. Just over 2 years after the program really was officially begun, the first prototype was rolled out. It was a single-seater 2000C, C standing for Hunter, Fighter. It flew in March of 2000, very quickly went supersonic, and from there even went to Mach 2. The second prototype flew late summer of that year, I think it was September, and it was the first to test some weapons loadout. The third prototype would fly in the spring of 1979, and it would test the new Cyrano radar and truly would be the first armed version. So we had 3 prototypes. These are all single-seaters. Well, because Dassault was interested in export, they created, under their own dime, internally, a 2-seat version, known as the Mirage 2000B here. And the prototype for it flew in 1980. And it was meant for conversion training, but it was fully armed. And the idea was to get this in service by 1982. And they came close. In fact, the first production, 2000C, flew in November of that year. And the French Air Force started to get their full production models in 1983. And the first squadron was formed in 1984. And very quickly, some updates were introduced. This is the M53 engine, again, made in France. And an improved version, the M53P2, was introduced with the 38th aircraft off the production line, and later an improved Cyrano radar would be introduced. Now, it was a bit of a double-edged sword. The original radar had some look-down, shoot-down capability. It had some ground attack capability. The improved version still had ground attack, but it was much more geared towards air-to-air interception, defense, dogfighting. So later Mirage 2000Cs had a radar geared more for air-to-air, meaning that really their air-to-ground was pretty limited, but it did exist. And comparing it to the original 3 over here, first scale size-wise, the 2000 is actually shorter. It's about 47 feet long, but it has a wider wingspan of 30 feet. It too is capable of achieving Mach 2, even up to Mach 2.2 at altitude. Has the same max altitude of about 56,000 feet. But where it really shines is in its payload. The 3 had only 5 hardpoints and could carry 4,000 kilograms. The 2000 has 9 hardpoints and can carry over 6,000 kilograms. And it still has the 2 30mm cannon, although the ammo has been slightly reduced to 125 shells instead of 150 on the earlier version. This engine is quite simple, lightweight, reliable, dependable, especially the later versions. And originally this was meant to use the Magic missile, first Gen 1, later Gen 2. It could also use medium-range air-to-air missiles like the Mirage 3. And some variants, especially if they had the earlier radar, but these are usually for export, could even fire the anti-ship Exocet missile, made famous in the Falklands War. Now, one thing I want to ask you about this model, this is what it came with, and they fit well, but these seem incorrect to me. What do you think? It definitely has the 5 hard points under the fuselage, but these seem too modern for the Mirage 2000B. That said, I believe this model is supposed to be from 2007, so it could be post-refit. So yeah, like I said, the first squadrons formed in 1984, and the French Air Force was true to its word. They ended up purchasing 124 single-seat 2000C models, and they purchased 30 2000B models, intending to use these as trainers. But it didn't stop there. In 1988, they would introduce the Mirage 2000N, N for nuclear. Having obvious changes for that strike role, they would ultimately purchase 86 of those, and they were twin-seaters. And then in 1995, they would introduce the Mirage 2000D. As nuclear was less of an important thing, multirole and ground attack and even seed missions became more of a critical thought, which I kind of talked about in the Rafael video. The 2000D had much better air-to-ground abilities, even able to launch guided munitions, and they would purchase 78 of those. The grand total that the French Air Force bought was 315. So see, it was a good idea they came out with a 2-seater, because actually they purchased more 2-seaters, if you count the B, N, and D variants, than they did the single-seat C. And it didn't just stop there. Dassault manufactured right at 600 of these, and the other half, nearly, went to export customers. This was pretty popular aircraft, considering that it was really hitting the stage right at the end of the Cold War and beginning of the post-Cold War budget cuts era. Dassault's first export customer was Egypt. They ordered a total of 16 single seats for 2 seats in 1981. But they actually weren't the first foreign user to put these into active service. That would be India. A year later, 82, India would discuss ordering or even license building over 100, maybe 120 to 150. They thought that the Mirage 2000C would be a good counter to Pakistan's recent acquirement of the F-16 from the USA. They felt that it was a more advanced aircraft than the original F-16A and B series. In the end, they only purchased 40, and they exercised an option to buy 9 more. Again, they were mostly single-seaters, but some two-seaters for training and other uses. And these were delivered in 85, and very quickly India put them into squadron service. And there's a bit of a sordid history there with the MiG-21 and 29 in India and other things. But anyway, India was the first to put them in service outside of France. The Egyptian order would actually be delivered between 1986 and 1988. Greece would also be another major foreign user. But by 1989, the French Air Force was kind of done. The French Navy toyed with adopting the Mirage 2000. A variant called the 2000M was even created, but it didn't see much success. They thought, well, this is starting to look a little aging. By that, it had kind of limited payload options. It couldn't use the newer munitions, air-to-air, long range, beyond visual range, some of those, and a lot of the air-to-surface guided munitions. Also, it just had that limited radar like I talked about. And it couldn't track and launch missiles at multiple targets like a modern aircraft. So an upgrade program was kickstarted. And it didn't take long. They took a 2000B, and in October of 1990, the upgraded 2000B first flew, and it really was quite an improvement. And then in April of 1991, an upgraded 2000C first flew. Now, during that time period, France had sent its original Mirage 2000Cs over to Iraq. That was really their first combat debut. And since they had pretty limited air-to-ground ability, the French 2000Cs could drop iron bombs, use rocket pods, use cluster munitions, but really didn't have much ability to use guided air-to-surface munitions, although they were very good at air-to-air, at least for the time, using the Magic II and so on and so forth. They were used for high-altitude escort and kind of just surveillance missions and running cap, that kind of thing. That's actually where I said in the Rafale video where the value of a two-seater came into mind, and hence why the Rafale B became more important than the C. So that really drove home that, look, the plane is aging. Thus, Dassault introduced what they called the Mirage 2005 here, an upgraded variant. And its first customer was the Republic of China, Taiwan. In 1992, they would order their first 2005s. And in 1993, the French Air Force, because of budget cuts and the Rafale being behind schedule and other things like that, they did upgrade the Mirage F1C to F1CT as kind of a fighter bomber to get them by. But for an air superiority, they ordered 37 Mirage 2005F variants, made especially by Dassault for them, to kind of fill the gap, 3 dozen aircraft. And they would actually take deliveries in the late 90s and enter into French Air Force service in the year 2000, quite fitting for the name. Therefore, when France was getting itself involved in its commitment in 2001-2002 over Afghanistan, they were kind of flying a mix of Mirage 2000Cs and some very new Mirage 2005Fs. And the F really did have some great improvements, but that wouldn't save it. Like I said, Greece was an important user. Initially, they had 17 2000Cs, and they had 2 2000Bs. But in 2000, 2002, in that time period, they bought 15 new production 2005 E models. There were several variants of this aircraft, just slightly tailored to the customer. And they asked Dassault to update 10 of their older aircraft to the new 2000-5 standard. This meant that they had 25 of the new aircraft in service, plus they still had 7 older Cs, and they had the 2 Bs, giving us a total of 34 in Greek service, which they're still in service today. And when I said that was kind of the end of it, this was always a stopgap solution, an interim measure till the Rafale came along. When the Rafale finally went into production, especially with the F2 and F3 variants, the Mirage 2005's days were numbered. The final aircraft was shipped out and delivered in November of 2007 to Greece, kind of giving them an important place in history. But they still serve. And with that, what is the 2005, which is our hobby master here? Switching back to the 2000B, it had a decent cockpit for its day and time. It was fly-by-wire, but it had a lot of analog controls and early computer displays inside. It did use a Martin Baker license-produced ejection seat made in France. It had a removable fixed fueling probe. Didn't retract. You could just either have it or not. It also had a removable tail hook. Like I said, though, its radar wasn't, and it, by the 1990s, couldn't carry the newest, fanciest guns or pods. So with the 5 here, we aim to correct that. Mostly this was an electronics, avionics update. The cockpit was totally gutted, or at least mostly so. It was a new glass cockpit, new advanced displays, and even though this was a true multi-role fighter now, because of the new interface and computer automation systems, it actually made the low workload for the pilot less, not more. It had a new Cyrano, or I think it was a Thompson by now, radar system that was truly multifunctional. It could track and attack multiple targets at once, and it could go air to air, air to sea, or air to ground, and not just air to ground, but it could do strike missions on fixed targets or even close air support on mobile targets, carrying a wide range of dumb or general purpose ordnance. It could also carry laser and GPS guided bombs. It carried the newer Mica missile, and of course it could still use the Magic 2 and other existing ones. This gave it a lot better capabilities. It also had a vastly improved electronic countermeasures, and it had a whole new stores system. Of course, it still used the M53 P2 engine, so a lot of the performance didn't change, and the airframes, if they were refurbished aircraft, were just updated and all that good jazz. So a new fancy glass cockpit, new stores system, new electronic countermeasures. Would it surprise you to learn that a lot of this stuff was actually lifted from the Rafale program? I mean, they already had the technology. Why not use it to update the Mirage 2000, since it's from the same company anyway? So there's a lot of interoperability with the 2005F and the Rafale Bs, Cs, and Ms. That's why they actually kind of took turns over Afghanistan in 2007. There would be 3 Rafales there for a while. They would go back, and then they would send 3 2005s to take their place. And while it can't carry as much as the Rafale, which can carry over 9,000 kilograms, this can carry over 6,000, and nearly the same warload, especially early on before the Rafale was fully developed. But this was a true multi-role aircraft. It really showed what it could be. And yeah, frankly, really earned a good name for itself. But of course, the difference in these two models is just antenna, really. I also believe, I don't think the 2000B has the 30mm cannon, at least not both of them. Let me know. I'm not sure, guys. And I would presume that some of the 2000Bs are updated, because again, the first prototype was actually a B model. So I wonder if that's why this is carrying the newer missiles, because it is supposed to be from 2007. Like I said, this is pretty heavy metal. And the Hobby Master is really about the same weight, if I come to think about it. But anyway, just because the production line was shut down, that doesn't mean the Mirage 2000 story ends quite yet. Let's take our Hobby Master off the stand. You know, funnily enough, Hobby Master actually did Mirage 2000Cs some years ago, but then they got in trouble from Dassault. They're very tight about their licensing of their aircraft. And that's why they're always expensive. You notice French aircraft are just pricey. Well, part of that's licensing. But they introduced the 2005 series a year or two ago, and they do quite a few, but this one is a French Air Force. They continue to update these. The new version is known as the Mirage 2000-5F Mark II Mk2. And these are continual updates. They aim to improve its offensive capabilities and defensive loads. Way the way back in 1995, France flew the original Mirage 2000 in Bosnia, and one was actually shot down by a shoulder-launched weapon. So they were always cognizant of improving things. The 2005 allowed for some external pods, while the Mark II improved its pod compatibility. They also improved its terrain following systems, GPS systems. They went to higher resolution displays in the cockpit. They improved its weapons carriage, especially guided munitions, air to surface. It carries the latest Mk2 missiles. By the way, anyone who's in the know, what do we have here? It's kind of hard to name things when I know these are still Magic 2s. Let me know on both these models. Feel free anytime in the comments. I wish HobbyMasterCollector.com listed off the ordnance the aircraft come with, but I digress. They also improved going to an all-digital electronic countermeasures suite for these. They went to a new radar version, which had faster processing, better target acquisition, better range, better resolution, just better. And would it surprise you to know all these changes for the Mark II? Again, we're kind of benefiting from the Rafale project, especially as we get into like the F3 series for the Rafale. So these are very closely related. These did serve alongside the Rafale in 2009, 2010, 2011, and Afghanistan. They also flew alongside them in 2011, Libya. And they've continued to see use everywhere ever since in France, including in 2018 in that big joint operation with the US and UK over Syria. And while production is over, the 2005F is still very much in French Air Force service, although the 2000N and 2000D are... The 2000N is fully retired. I don't know if the 2000D is fully retired, but I believe it is. If I'm wrong, let me know, please. So the planes that they have are still flying, but they don't have all that many, 30 or 40 total. And of course, they will eventually age out. They're kind of being used as second line. Essentially, that seems to be the life of a fighter. When it's new and shiny, it's a fighter interceptor, dogfighter. As it ages, it turns more into a strike fighter, fighter bomber, you know, a mud fighter, if you will. Because it's still fast, it's still durable, and the aircraft still have life in them. Oh, another system that was borrowed from the Rafale project, the Mark IIs now have an onboard oxygen generation system. Always good to have oxygen. Looking at this compared with our new Panzerkampf, weight-wise, they are very similar. I would actually say the ordnance sticks onto the Panzerkampf better. The newer 2000s also can use those giant drop tanks that you saw on the Rafale. Those actually started off for the 2000N variant, but weren't available for the 2000Cs and Bs originally. But now they're available for the newer 2005s. And of course, like I said, Greece still flies these. Taiwan still flies the version. And it's met with reasonable success. And it's a good plane. Good, reliable engine, decent payload. Newer versions can really carry just about anything that the Rafale can. But with the Meteor missiles, I don't know that the newest Mark IIs can carry those. If anyone knows, let me know, please. That might be where they start to kind of get left behind finally. But for now, they still do really well. In fact, they've been dropping laser-guided bombs for 20 years. They started off in Afghanistan in 2001, 2002, and continue to this day. So I think that pretty much wraps things up. Looking at this versus the Panzerkampf, frankly, I'm quite happy with the Panzerkampf. I always wanted a Mirage 2000B or C, and I think they did a good job. And next time, we'll talk about the Mirage 3 more, and we might even get into the Mirage F1. I finally found a model in 1/72 scale diecast for it. And again, I've had this Hobbymaster for a time, and I've shown it in a few videos. But this one's new, and I'm happy it worked out. They just call this Mirage 2000B. They don't really give any data. I have to wonder with its weapons loadout if it's more like a Mirage 2000D, or if it's an updated Mirage 2000B to the -5 standard. Let me know what you think. I will say it has the same basic features as Hobbymaster, removable ordnance. It has gear up or down. It even has this, there you go, hinged canopy. The front one, like a Hobbymaster, doesn't hinge. It's actually replaceable. You get two, open or closed. No pilot figures, but I put Hobbymasters in here, and these actually fit quite well. Kind of reminds me of a Skymax plane. It's very metal. Again, the tail on this is definitely metal. And I do like the stand and how these plug in. They're very good. The only bad thing about the taller stands like these, they're easier to knock over because, well, gravity. I do kind of like the squat stands. But the nice thing is on a shelf, if you have different height stands, you can kind of alternate them, you know, short, tall, and it makes fitting stuff a lot easier. So let me know what you think. And if you haven't seen it, check out my previous video on the Rafale. With that, feel free to comment. Let me know about missiles that you see, if you know the names of them. That would help me out greatly. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon. Next time.